Good morning, fellow book lovers. My name is Ellen Pitts. Welcome to the 16th Annual Savannah Book Festival. This year's festival is presented by the Philip B. and Nancy B. Beekman Foundation, David and Nancy Citron, Robert Faircloth, the Courtney Knight Gaines Foundation, and the Gerald D. and Helen M. Stevens Foundation, with a special thanks to a grant from the Georgia Humanities. We are especially grateful to our friends Gary and Judy Lautzenheiser for sponsoring the Lutheran Church of the Ascension this sanctuary today. I'd also like to welcome our generous sponsors and literati members. It is through your support that we are able to make festival events this Saturday free to the public. As Carrie said, 90% of our revenue comes from our donors and literati members, and we thank you. This year's festival is full of great events and authors, and the best way to make sure you don't miss any of it is to download the Savannah Book Festival app on your phone. If you need more information about that, you'll find it on the back of your program. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Patrick Radden Keefe will be signing festival purchase copies of his book in Telfair Square immediately following the presentation. If you're planning to stay for the next authors, Joe Madden and Tom Verducci, please move forward at the end of the presentation as the venue empties. Please take a moment right now, if you don't mind, to make sure that your cell phone is turned off. And we also ask that there be no flash photography, and due to its recent restoration, there is to be absolutely no drinking or eating in this space. On the back of your program, you will find a QR code for a survey. We'd appreciate if you would take a moment to share your opinion. Your input will help us improve the festival, and it will impact money that we get for the arts in this town. Later, as you exit, you will see volunteers once again with yellow buckets, and we do hope you will consider making a donation to the Savannah Book Festival. We'll have the opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. At that time, please raise your hand, and an usher will bring you a microphone so that everyone can hear your question. Patrick Radden Keefe is here with us today, courtesy of Carrie and Jerry Stoltz. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker and the author, most recently, of the New York Times bestseller, Say Nothing, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland, which received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction, was selected as one of the 10 best books of 2019 by the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and the Wall Street Journal. And it was named one of the 10 best nonfiction books of the decade by Entertainment Weekly. His previous books are The Snakehead and Chatter. His work has been recognized with a Guggenheim Fellowship, the National Magazine Award for Feature Writing, and the Orwell Prize for Political Writing. He is also the creator and host of the 8-part podcast, Wind of Change. Please give a warm Savannah welcome to Patrick Radden Keefe.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. And thank you all for coming out to this beautiful room on this cold day. I love Savannah. It's great to be back. My wife and I were here about 10 years ago with our at the time, our only child, who was a baby. And we have brought back both of our kids. The older one is now 12. So it's exciting to be back here with them. My sons didn't want to come to the event today. I asked them if they wanted to join, and they said, any new material, Dad? Like any stories that we haven't heard you tell a million times? And I said, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you there. So they're back in the hotel. So my day job is I write for the New Yorker magazine, and it's one of those funny stories where that's actually something that I started wanting to do when I was a high school student. I developed the ambition not just to be a journalist or a magazine journalist, but to write for the New Yorker. I grew up in Boston, and I would go to my school library in high school, and we had a periodicals room. I'm told that high schools no longer have periodicals rooms. You know, your periodicals room is your phone. But at the time, there would be these magazines lined up along the wall, and I would pick up the New Yorker. And I just fell in love with the particular form of the New Yorker article, which is to say, a true story, a nonfiction story, but told at the length of a long magazine article, something that might take you 45 minutes to read, something that took the person who wrote it 6 months, maybe a year, to write. And for me, there was just something magical about that, because it was, much more enveloping than a newspaper story. There were characters, there was plot. You really felt like you'd get sucked into it. But it wasn't as much of a time commitment as a book. It had its own kind of structure, and you were in and out in a sitting. You could finish the piece and be done in an hour. Some of you who subscribe to The New Yorker may be thinking to yourselves right now that that's not your experience of the magazine, that the articles that you just keep reading and reading and they seem to never end, and the magazine piles up on your bedside table like an accusation. But I love that feeling of getting immersed in those types of stories, and I thought in high school, boy, I'd love to do that when I get older. Easier said than done, it turns out. It was a tricky path to try and get it to happen. I started pitching The New Yorker when I was in college and got a lot of rejection slips and went off to grad school and then eventually to law school. And thinking essentially, I'm going to have a career here if this ambition to write for The New Yorker doesn't work out. And it was after I had just finished law school and passed the bar exam that they finally, after years and years and years of pitches, took my first freelance pitch. And part of what I love about this career that I have there is that I get to sort of move from subject to subject. I only write about 3 or 4 pieces a year. They're these long pieces, and they're investigative, and I don't have a beat, as journalists would talk about. There's not a subject that I keep coming back to. I can move from one thing to another. So my last book, prior to the one that I'm going to talk to you about today, was called Empire of Pain, and it was about the Sackler family and the opioid crisis, and that grew out of a piece in the magazine. But the book before that was called Say Nothing, and it was about the murder of a mother of 10 during the Troubles in Northern Ireland in 1972. There was a woman who was disappeared, and there was this mystery about what had happened to her. And so I told a whole story about the Troubles through the lens of that particular moment. So there's very little through line from one of those projects to the next, but that's actually part of what I like about it. If there is a continuity for me, it's probably that I am thinking of these as stories, that I like to think of certainly the books as almost like a novel, but it's nonfiction, that you're thinking about characters and plot and tension and drama. I'm sometimes asked, who's the reader that I have in mind when I sit down to write? And I think for some writers this is an abstract question, but if you write for a magazine, it's a pretty concrete one, because I see those readers every time I get on the New York subway. I'll see people pull out the New Yorker magazine and flip it open, and occasionally over the years there have been these amazing moments where I see this happen on a week when I have an article in the magazine. So I'll see somebody get on at 14th Street and they pull out the magazine and they start flipping, and from time to time I'll see them turn the page to my article. And internally what I'm thinking is, should I say something? And I start kind of inching over and wondering, would it be weird for them if I tap them on the shoulder? And on at least one occasion, I've had the kind of terrifying experience of like inching closer and closer to the person who has just started reading my article, and then just as I'm about to say something, I see them finish the first paragraph and turn to the next article, which is pretty devastating, let me tell you. But what it makes me think about, and I think about it every time I sit down to write, is that I don't take the reader's attention for granted for a second. I need to earn your attention in every sentence, in every paragraph. I always think of the beginning of a piece as like it's like the top of the water slide. I just need to get you over that, and then hopefully you'll be carried along by it. My editor, who I've worked with for 15 years, he jokes that I do have a beat, and my beat is the investigative melodrama. So, I'm writing these investigative pieces, but I want them to feel like an opera when you're experiencing them. And recently we put together this book called Rogues, which is my most recent book, and it's 12 pieces from the last 15 years. And it's funny because I said a moment ago that I don't have a beat, but of course, when I looked at all the stories, and especially my favorite of the stories that I've written, and I kind of laid them all out there, I realized that there are certain themes, there are certain continuities. I'm very interested in crime and corruption. I'm interested in denial and the lies that we tell ourselves within a family or within a community or within a nation, and how those dynamics work. There's another thing that I often do, which is what we call the write-around. So a lot of the time, if you have a newsroom at a newspaper or an editorial meeting at a magazine, and you talk about writing about somebody, the first question is, well, will they cooperate? Will the person give you an interview? And it's often the case that if the person says no, you just move on and you say, okay, well, we won't write about them. There's a funny thing that happens at the New Yorker, which is that we have these ideas meetings on Tuesday afternoons. And the price of admission to the meeting is you have to propose 3 article ideas. And everybody can come. The most junior employees can come in. You got to throw out 3 ideas. And every 6 months or so, somebody comes in and they say, we should write a big profile of the singer Beyonce. And everybody kind of rolls their eyes because they say, we've been trying for years. She won't give us an interview. And if you can't get the interview, then we won't do the piece. So I do something called a write-around, which is when the person won't cooperate and you write about them anyway. And this is a tricky thing to do. It's labor-intensive. But I think that often it actually creates a more vivid portrait than you could get, even if the person gave you an interview, which might sound a little counterintuitive, but bear with me. If you're writing about somebody who has any kind of power, or who is very wealthy, or who has a lot of experience dealing with the press, a lot of the time what you don't realize when you pick up the paper and you read that interview is that it's been very carefully stage managed by their lawyers, by their PR people. It may be that they've gotten some form of quote approval in the article. There are no-go areas, don't ask about the personal life, that sort of thing. And I think that there are all kinds of concessions that are made by journalists when they do that. And one of the nice things about doing a write-around is the person says, I won't cooperate, and you say, okay, and then you just write around them. So in the case of the Sackler family, for instance, who I wrote this book, Empire of Pain, about, it's really a biography of 3 generations of this family, and none of them spoke to me. In fact, they threatened to sue me for 2 years while I was working on the book. But I spoke to friends of theirs and people who'd worked for them and people who'd lived with them. I spoke to housekeepers, administrative assistants, doormen, a yoga instructor, you name it. You can find these people, and I got a very vivid sense of who they were by writing around them. There's a story in this book, Rogues, about Mark Burnett, who was the reality TV producer who initially made Survivor, which was a big hit, and then made The Apprentice with Donald Trump. And when I approached Burnett about doing a story about the making of The Apprentice, he didn't want to talk to me at all. But he had these 2 ex-wives who did. And it's funny because in retrospect, I honestly would prefer to have those interviews with the 2 ex-wives than to have had an interview with Burnett in which it would have been me and his lawyer and his PR person and his other PR person, and there would have been all these kind of guidelines about what I could ask. So what I'm going to do today is just tell you 3 quick stories to try and give you a sense of what for me is the sort of excitement and weirdness of this line of work, writing these kinds of magazine stories, each one pegged to one of the 12 stories in Rogues. And the first one is about a write-around. And this was a write-around of the drug kingpin Chapo Guzman. I've always been very interested in the drug trade. And I had always been interested particularly in the Sinaloa cartel because it's the biggest of the Mexican drug cartels. It was this big multi-billion-dollar commodities business, basically, that was sending all these drugs into the United States. And it was run by this guy, Chapo Guzman, who, when I started looking into him 10 years ago, was not as much of a household name, but he was on the run at the time, living in the mountains, running this multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And initially I wrote a piece actually for the New York Times Magazine about him in 2012, and then he was captured a couple of years later, finally. And my editor called me on the weekend and said, Chapo Guzman just got captured. You need to write about the hunt for him and how they brought him down. So I wrote this story called The Hunt for El Chapo. and it's in Rogues, all about the ways in which the authorities in the US and in Mexico cooperated to track him down in the mountains and figure out where he was, and it's very dramatic. There are these chases through the sewers and kind of all this wild stuff. And I didn't talk to Chapo when I was writing the piece because he was locked up in a prison in Mexico. And I did, talk to a lot of other people who'd gone after him, people who'd worked for him. And the article came out. And I don't think I had given any thought to the idea that he would read it. In part because famously he's almost illiterate, that he was running this big business but actually never really learned to read and write all that well. But also he didn't strike me as like a New Yorker subscriber, And the piece came out, and a few days later I got this voicemail at my office phone from a guy who said that he was an attorney for the Guzman family and he wanted to talk to me. And I freaked out because it was just nervous making. This guy he's killed lots of people. I didn't, my wife is in the front row, I did not tell my wife that I had gotten this voicemail. I thought it was probably best not to have this conversation. And I called a guy that I knew who worked in the federal government and had been involved in the hunt for Chapo, and I said, here's the name of this guy. Is he really an attorney for the Guzman family? And he sort of ran the name, and he made a few calls, and he came back and he said, yeah, he's really an attorney for the Guzman family. He's a real cartel attorney. And he's one of these cartel attorneys who's like 30% attorney and 70% cartel. So that made me even more nervous, and I was kind of gaming out, what's this going to be about? There was one of the revelations in the article was that Chapo Guzman, when he was on the run, he would go from one safe house to another. He never slept in the same bed any night. And there were all these logistics associated with kind of keeping him in the style that he was accustomed to living while also living underground, and that he was a big consumer of Viagra. And it was funny because his people, when they got the wiretaps and they intercepted all of a lot of it was like, how do we get the Viagra to the boss? He's going to be in this place. And I put that in the article not thinking that it might be, that writing about this very macho guy, he might not be crazy about that sort of revelation. So I worried that we were going to have a whole conversation about that Viagra. And I finally called the guy back, and he spoke in this very formal, kind of starchy, accented English, and he said, Mr. Keefe, we have read your article. And he said, El Señor, this is what they call Chapo inside the cartels, El Señor. He said, El Señor is ready to write his memoirs. And I had gamed out all the different ways I thought this conversation would go. And I had an answer for everything. I was like, if he says this, I'm going to say that. If he says this, if he says Viagra, I'm going to say, what a virile guy. Of course he needs lots of Viagra. This was not on my bingo card at all. And I didn't know how to respond. And so I was just kind of stuttering. I was just kind of like, that's a book I'd like to read. And there was this dramatic pause, and he said, but sir, is it a book you would like to write? And this is how Chapo Guzman asked me to ghostwrite his memoir, which was just not something I had ever anticipated happening. And I should say I said no before we'd even gotten off the phone, because it's appealing, the idea that I could kind of get up close to this person who I had found so fascinating, but it also just seemed like it probably wouldn't end well. I tried to explain that, even in the best of circumstances, like when you have a ghostwriter and a subject, sometimes things kind of fray between them. And when it's the head of the Sinaloa cartel, I didn't necessarily want to see where that was going to go. So I said no. Hilariously, he called me a week later, and he was like, as you continue to consider our offer, and I was like, no, I've considered. But I tell you this story, though, because it does sort of open up a window into just the weirdness, right, of spending 6 months thinking about this guy, talking to all these people who know him, putting this article out into the world. I assume he'll never read it. He reads it, and then I think he's going to kill me, and instead he gets in touch and says, hey, what about ghostwriting my memoir? The second story I'm going to tell you is about a case in which I actually did have cooperation from the people I was writing about. A very, very sad story, and one of the ones that really lingers with me as much as anything I've ever written. In 2010, there was a woman named Amy Bishop, who was a professor at the University of Alabama at Huntsville. And she walked into a faculty meeting one day and was surrounded by a bunch of her colleagues in the biology department of the university. And at the end of the meeting, she pulled out a gun and she shot 6 of them. And it was a big story. I'm afraid that mass shootings these days are pretty much a daily occurrence, but it's quite unusual to have one carried out by a woman. It's almost always men. And it was unusual to have somebody with her educational pedigree. She'd gotten a PhD at Harvard. She was this, pretty elite professor. And in the immediate aftermath, it came out that she had just been denied tenure, and there was some sense that, is this how bad things have gotten with tenure and what have you? She seemed very disgruntled. But what was interesting about the story was that after she was in custody, the Alabama cops got a call from a police chief in Braintree, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston, not far from where I grew up. And the police chief said, "Hey, that woman you have in custody, I thought you want to know, back in 1987, she shot and killed her brother with a shotgun." And it emerged that when she was in college and her brother, Seth, was a teenager, she had indeed shot and killed him in the kitchen of the family home. And there was only one witness to that shooting. It was their mother, Judy. So Judy Bishop was this woman who had 2 kids. And she walks into the kitchen one day and she sees one shoot the other. And she knows the cops are coming. And when the cops get there, she has to tell them something. And what she says is, "I saw the whole thing. It was an accident." And I wasn't that interested in Amy Bishop, who just seemed kind of nuts, for shooting her colleagues. But Judy Bishop seemed like a really interesting figure to me, because that choice that she made, you've only got 2 kids, the cops are on the way, what do you tell them? I think is a choice that any of us who are parents and are being honest with ourselves would really wrestle with. You've just lost one child. You may be about to lose the other. And in this case, she sort of protected her daughter. And then the town of Braintree, I think, kind of protected the family. They felt like this is a private matter. This terrible thing has happened behind closed doors, and we don't want to ask too many questions about it. And so they all kind of turned away. And Amy Bishop was never arrested. She was never charged. She was never questioned in a serious way by the police. She never sought any therapy. There was never any kind of file in her permanent record as she moved through life saying that this had happened. And all these years later, suddenly she explodes and ends up killing 3 people, shooting 6. And so I started to write about that story. And eventually I did talk to Amy Bishop, who called me from the prison where she was. But I also talked to the parents. And Sam and Judy Bishop were in this awful situation, right, where they'd had this horrible tragedy in their past, and then more recently their daughter had been a mass shooter. And they were confused, they felt terrible about everything, they hadn't spoken to the press. And I went and spent a few long days with them in the home where they lived in Massachusetts. And those are incredibly difficult encounters. I mean, it's one of the things you have to do as a journalist is sometimes you talk to the people who, they're in a weird position, right? They're not the one who's done the horrible thing, but they raised the person who did the horrible thing. And the problem that I had was that we talked, and I actually felt as though I felt kind of close to them, that it was very intimate, the conversations we were having. They'd never talked to anyone in the press. They were finally telling their story. But as they talked, I felt as though they were lying to themselves, that they were in denial, that this whole story in some ways for me was a story of denial, that sometimes, I'm sure many people in this room, you have a family member or you see something in your community and it's troubling to you, but you feel that you have to look away. You kind of can't look at it in the face. And the trouble is that occasionally that will, the bad thing doesn't go away, right? And there are terrible consequences. And so we would have these conversations where, just to give you one example, Amy had told me that she had attempted suicide when she was young. And I said to her parents, Amy told me that she tried to kill herself. And they both said, oh, that wasn't a suicide attempt. It wasn't a suicide attempt. And they said, no, it was, she was we were carving pumpkins. And she was carving the pumpkin, and she had a knife, and she wanted to see how sharp the knife was. And so she cut her wrist and ended up going to the emergency room. And as a writer, that puts me in this awful situation, right? Because I feel great compassion for them, and yet I think that they are in denial. And when it comes to writing the story, I can't pull punches for them. I have to tell the truth as I see it. And so I did. I sort of laid it out all on the page, not in a way that was cruel to them, but in a way that's honest. And the night before the article came out, it was a Sunday night, and Sam and Judy called me. And they'd already been through the fact-checking process, so I think they had a rough sense of where it was going. And I remember Sam said to me, I want you to know that no matter what happens tomorrow, we're happy that we told our story to you. And the next day, the article came out, and they haven't spoken to me since. And emotionally, I won't lie, that's upsetting for me. But professionally, there's nothing I would do differently. And I think it sort of gives you this sense that you have to become quite intimate sometimes with the people you write about, but you also have to keep your eye on the North Star, which is the truth. And that's where your loyalties lie. The last story I'll tell you is a brief one. And it's about one of my favorite pieces I've ever written. It's in the book. It's the last story in Rogues, about Anthony Bourdain, the late chef and TV host. I had a run of these pretty dark stories, like the Amy Bishop story, and my editor said, "Boy, we got to give you some R&R. We got to find something that you would enjoy. What would you like to do that could be fun?" And I said, "I want to travel with Anthony Bourdain." And they said, all right, let's do it. And I reached out to him and said, hey, what would you think? And he said, that's great. Let's hang out. You can write about me. And I ended up spending a full year on that piece, which may have been more than was strictly necessary. But we would meet up at restaurants, and he knew every chef in the city, and we had a great time. And we ended up traveling together to Vietnam because he was making an episode. It actually ended up being the episode where he meets Barack Obama in Hanoi. I wasn't there for that, but we met up in Hanoi, this city that he loves, and we were hanging out there. And I remember there was this one afternoon where he'd been shooting a scene where he's at some little noodle shop by the side of the road, and they finished shooting. And he came over to me and he said, hey, you want to go for a ride? And the production had gotten him a Vespa. So we walk over to this Vespa, and he says, I only have one helmet, but you can wear it. And he gets on the front of the Vespa, and I get on the back of the Vespa with the helmet, and I'm holding on to him by the stomach, and we go zooming off. And Hanoi is one of these, I think it's like 5 or 6 million motorbikes in Hanoi, these wide avenues, designed by the French, and just these millions of motorbikes, and you kind of course along, and there's smoke from cook fires, and people left and right, and you're kind of weaving around. It's this unbelievable experience. And as we're zooming along, I have this internal monologue in my head, and what I'm thinking is, I am the best journalist in the world. This is going to be a hell of a scene in my piece. Here I am, riding with Anthony Bourdain on a Vespa through Hanoi, and kind of cruising along, almost dying every time we almost crash. And I've just got this whole kind of self-congratulatory thing going on where I'm thinking, is this going to be the beginning of the article or the end of the article? Maybe I'll put it in the middle. Maybe I'll start with it and then come back to it. And so we finally finish our ride. We end up at the hotel. I go back and wake up in the middle of the night with jet lag. And suddenly it dawns on me that he gave me that scene. Anthony Bourdain was a writer himself. When he first put himself on the map, it wasn't in TV. It was with the book Kitchen Confidential, which I read when it came out back in 1999. And he knows what makes a good story, what makes a good article, what makes a good scene. And he was a very generous soul. And the kind of generous soul who doesn't need to tell you when he's doing you a favor. So I was the kind of fish out of water reporter there in Hanoi, tagging along, trying to get what I need for my article. And he gave it to me. He said, what if we go on a ride on this Vespa through Hanoi? And so that was the thought that I had as I finally drifted back to sleep in Hanoi. And I think it's a thought that reflects very well on him and on some of the magic of this kind of work. and makes me miss him very much today, is that we'd been riding along and I was thinking that I'd snookered him by getting him into a situation in which I was going to be able to get this scene, when in fact he'd given it to me out of the goodness of his heart, and he'd snookered me. I'm going to leave it at that, but I'd love to hear any questions you have, and thank you so much again for coming out.
Thank you. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and we will have people with mics. Please, I see someone in the back center.
Thank you. I love all of your writing, but I love the podcast as well. Any plans to do another one?
Oh, thank you. It's funny, that podcast, for those of you who don't know, I did a podcast that came out in 2020 called Wind of Change. And it was probably the most fun I've ever had in my working life. I'll tell you very quickly the synopsis of the podcast, because it may make you chuckle. There's a famous song called Wind of Change by a German heavy metal band, the Scorpions, that came out in 1990. You'd probably recognize it if you heard it. It's a metal ballad, and there's a famous whistle, and it's all about kind of hope and freedom spreading across Europe. And it came out right around the time the Berlin Wall fell. And then it sort of became the anthem to the end of the Cold War. You had young people in what is now the former Soviet Union handing bootleg tapes to each other and singing the song in the streets. And what my podcast is that about a decade ago, a friend of mine who's also been a source for me for a long time gave me this pretty irresistible tip. He said, that song Wind of Change by the metal band the Scorpions? Well, the Scorpions didn't actually write that song. The CIA did. And Wind of Change is an 8-part investigation to get to the bottom of that question. So it's sort of half hair metal rock doc and half paranoid Cold War espionage thriller. I probably will do another podcast. I had so much fun doing it, in part because so much of what I do is solitary. I work alone. And I'm interviewing people all the time, but it's mostly just me, kind of alone in the mine shaft. And making a podcast, it's like you ran off and joined the circus. I had a team, and we would travel around the world to do it. And I grew very, very close to my producers. And so we've talked about other ideas. We've certainly gotten some proposals for Wind of Change Season 2. These people who say, 1988, George Michael and Wham went to China. Was this a CIA operation? But we haven't found the right thing yet. So I think we'll get to it. And in the meantime, what I've been doing is I've been doing the narration on my audiobooks, which I really enjoy. It was a kind of an interesting segue for me from talking to a mic like this on a podcast to doing the audiobooks, which is so it's definitely a side of things I want to continue to explore. But thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your speech today. Question I have for you, as a one-time office printer salesperson, I understand how much people cannot want to talk to somebody. Do you have any interesting stories or experiences trying to speak to sources, trying to convince them to talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the hardest aspect of the job, is that a lot of the time you're trying to get people to talk about things they don't want to talk about. And the whole thing with write-arounds for me is sometimes you just decide, well, even if they won't talk, I'm going to try and find another way to do this. But that book, Say Nothing, that I wrote about the Troubles in Northern Ireland, literally, think about the title of that book. It is about a code of silence, and that was one where it took me 4 years, and I kept going back and forth to Northern Ireland and sort of working on people and trying to get them to talk. Some of it for me is I'll send people my work sometimes and say, look, this is the kind of thing I do. This is not going to be a fly-by-night thing. I'm going to keep coming back. I'm going to try and tell this with nuance, and occasionally people will engage with that, or will see some other thing I've done, and that helps. And the other thing that a lot of the time I'll do is I try and if you have any kind of a closed community, I find sometimes all you need is the first link in the chain. So for instance, like cops or like DEA agents or, frankly, like Mexican drug runners or, I wrote a book about the underground in Chinatown, people on the kind of fringes of the legal economy in Chinatown. A lot of the time, all you need to do is find that first person who can kind of kiss you in and say, I talked to him, he's legit, you should talk to him. When I did the book about Chinatown, I went to China at a certain point, and the guy who was like my guy in Chinatown flew to China with me. And for a couple of weeks, he would just call people up and be like, I'm coming to your house, I'm bringing this guy, you're gonna talk to him. And so I think having those kinds of, finding people who are sort of trusted brokers who can vouch is always helpful. And then the other thing, like what I did with the Bishops, actually, Amy Bishop's parents, is initially they didn't respond to me. And I just kind of dug in to Braintree, to that community, and I talked to so many people who knew them that they were getting calls all the time from people who said, oh, I just talked to that reporter. And then I think what happens is that, like, at least in terms of the approach that I take, they'll say, oh, what was it like? And it's like, oh, well, we talked for 2.5 hours. He has a lot of questions. And they get a sense of the seriousness of what I'm doing. But occasionally that can backfire. I mean, certainly I tried to get Jerry Adams to talk to me for my IRA book, and it's all about a murder that he authorized in 1972. And I tried the line with him, like, nobody's gonna work harder than I am. I'm gonna get to the bottom of it. And I realized in retrospect that was the wrong thing to be saying if I wanted him to talk to me, so.
Hello. Hello. Is the Murdaugh case in your future? And I guess the follow-up question I would ask is a story like that replicated so many times across this country, in small towns everywhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I looked at that one. It's interesting because a lot of the writing that I do probably, certainly if you go to the bookstore, a lot of the time it'll be filed under true crime. And I have mixed feelings about true crime as a genre. I mean, I think that we are irresistibly drawn to stories of crime. And, but it's a tricky thing because I don't always just want to serve it up just because people want it. It's like that show they just made about Jeffrey Dahmer is like the most watched thing in the history of Netflix, and I don't understand that. I don't want to kind of truck in that sort of thing. So for me, the question is always: is there some deeper theme? Is there some larger story that you're telling? So like in the case of Amy Bishop, I remember having these conversations with my editor where it was like, Amy Bishop walks into a room and shoots 6 people. I don't really care to understand all that well why it is that she did that. Her mom has that experience. That's something I feel as though any of us have some sort of, would have like a way in emotionally, or it might make us think about the decisions that we make in our own lives. So yeah, these on one level, these stories are kind of dime a dozen. I'm always interested in the ones that reveal a kind of deeper corruption sometimes, particularly in like if there's any sort of small town or any city where you realize that people's connections run deep. And a lot of the time, I mean, it doesn't have to be a small, my book about the Sacklers, I think of that as a crime story. The Sacklers have never been charged with any crimes. And the little town where they're dug in is New York City. And I think that, or Washington, D.C., for that matter, I think if you look at that family and the money they made selling a drug that has killed a lot of people, part of what that story is about is on a pretty grand scale, they had connections, and you see the way those connections play out. So yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, there are these kinds of stories all over the place. For me personally, I always want to find something a little bit more, something that elevates it a little bit, so I feel as though I'm telling a story not just of the kind of immediate tragedy, but something that might hopefully have a kind of larger resonance.
What do you think of the legal wrangling about the Sacklers? Do you follow it?
Yeah, I follow it very closely. This is the downside of having gone to law school, is I have a kind of interest in and a fluency in that kind of thing. Having said that, when I was writing the book, one thing I kept thinking about was you're not writing a legal brief. Like you're not writing for specialists. I'm always thinking about writing in a way that's accessible. And so it was a tricky thing because the legal stuff is interesting to me, but it's incredibly complicated. It'll cross your eyes if you think too hard about it. So the question is, how do you distill this into a story? But yeah, I mean, listen, in the case of the Sacklers, you have a family that's worth $11 billion, and they end up in bankruptcy court with their company because there's thousands of lawsuits against the company. And the reason they end up in bankruptcy court is that about 10 or 15 years before this happened, the family started quietly pulling money out of the company. So they it was like, I think, they knew that a day was gonna come when the company was gonna have to pay the piper. And so what they started doing was a few $100 million here, a few $100 million there. They're pulling money out. They end up taking $10 billion out of the company and putting it in their own accounts. And then when there's all these lawsuits, they say, oh, the company doesn't have any money anymore. We're so sorry. We're not going to be able to, we're going to have to declare bankruptcy. That to me that's a story that can be legible for anybody. You don't need to be a lawyer to understand that that's messed up. And in fact, sometimes I think it helps to not be a lawyer, that there's a kind of almost emperor's new clothes thing. When you talk to the lawyers who are really in it, and they're all charging, $2,000 an hour to be a party to the thing, they'll say, oh no, but you have to understand, if you look at the bankruptcy code, actually it makes sense in terms of corporate. From the outside, we can see that stinks.
The Anthony Bourdain story is a beautiful example of a subject manipulating you in a good way. Do you have any examples of times when a subject might have been manipulating you and you didn't see it at first, but afterwards felt uncomfortable about the way the story had gone?
Oh man, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it happened. Listen, I like to think that my spidey sense is pretty good when it comes to these things. And one of the big advantages I have is I spend so much time writing pieces that if somebody's conning me, I just have the advantage that if I'm spending 9 months thinking about it, I have more time to sort of see the con. So there's a story in Rogues where I'll tell you the very abbreviated version of this, but I had heard that there was this guy named Hervé Falciani who worked at HSBC in Geneva. He worked at the Swiss bank. And he walked out at a certain point with these files which had all this client data. And he ends up in France, and he's got all these files, and he says, look, I've got these files that show all the tax evasion. All these wealthy people around the world are hiding their money at HSBC in Geneva and not paying taxes. So the way I heard it was he was the Edward Snowden of Swiss banking. And I thought, that sounds like a story. And so I told my editors, I got to go meet the Edward Snowden of Swiss banking, and I want to go to Paris. And they said, okay. And I fly to Paris. I meet him for lunch. We sit down. We start talking. And about 30 minutes into the conversation, I start thinking, oh my God, this man is a compulsive liar. None of what he's saying makes any sense at all. The more questions I ask him, the more incoherent his story becomes. He's not the Edward Snowden of Swiss banking. I don't know what's going on here, but it's something fishy. We ended up talking for 4 hours. I flew home, and I said to my editor, I think he's a thief. I think he stole that data because he wanted to sell it. And then when he got busted, he said, oh wait, tax evasion is bad, transparency is good, I'm Edward Snowden. And so we just kind of shelved the article. I felt like I can't do this because he's an unreliable narrator, and how do you build a story around an unreliable narrator? And about 8 months later, I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, he's an unreliable narrator. What a great way to write a story. You build it around his unreliability, and I won't give too much away, you should read the piece, but I mean, it's fun because when you talk to somebody like that and you say, really? You were kidnapped by the Mossad? Like, tell me what that was about. That you can really take them down the garden path if you realize that they're just going to kind of keep going with these fabulous tales. But in terms of other ones, yeah, I mean, there are moments where you write about somebody and they, you sort of realize that they were using the piece. There was a story I wrote years ago, it's not in Rogues, about an environmental litigation involving dumping. It's a complicated story about Chevron and Ecuador, a very big environmental litigation. and the lawyer who brought the case, and on behalf of these indigenous communities in Ecuador. And there was a guy named Randy Mastro, who had worked for Rudy Giuliani, who's a partner at Gibson Dunn in New York, a really tough litigator. And he kind of goes after the guy that I was writing about in this kind of kill the lawyer strategy. In my mind, he was kind of the villain of the opera. And he gave me lots of interviews, I wrote the story, and there's this like big bad corporate lawyer, Randy Mastro, who sets out to destroy this environmental lawyer. And what was funny is the piece came out and I thought, oh boy, it was like with Chapo, I was like, boy, what's Randy Mastro gonna think of this story? It paints him in a pretty unfavorable light. And the day it came out, his law firm put it on their website. Because for them, they're like, this is our guy, you know, this is the guy you hire. If you really wanna beat an environmental lawyer to death, here's the guy to do it. So occasionally you can feel, you know, like I wouldn't change a word of that piece, but that was one where I didn't predict how they would use it. Thank you so much for coming again. We'll see you.
Thank you.